Welcome to Marketplace Live. Let's defy gravity.
So, good day, everybody. Thank you for all joining this session today at Marketplace Live. I have the pleasure of introducing Mike Fischer, who's the CEO of Shadow, for this fireside chat session. Mike, thank you for joining today. Would you be able to tell our audience a little bit more about yourself and about Shadow?
Sure. So I've been involved in consumer technology and entertainment for more than 25 years, across almost every major gaming platform there's been, from the 8-bit days at Sega through Xbox, Microsoft, and Amazon, and even worked on Fortnite. So Shadow is a natural place for me to come, because Shadow is, from my point of view, the future of gaming. It is a cloud-based gaming PC that substitutes the need for buying an expensive hardware device to play games with an affordable monthly subscription.
And so, the gaming industry is what, a $160 billion industry. And like many other industries that we talk about, it's going through a degree of kind of digital transformation. So how would you see this impact in the way that gaming organizations like yourselves are kind of having to approach IT infrastructure and that kind of whole technology stack?
Yeah, there's a really major shift that's happening. I mean, Shadow was a pioneer in offering a cloud gaming experience. You've seen, new companies jumping in like Google Stadia and Amazon now with their new service as well. And I sort of compare it to how the electric car has slowly become part of more people's lifestyles. At first, cloud gaming was sort of exotic. It seemed risky. People were concerned about whether latency would work. And there were earlier offerings about a decade ago, like OnLive and Gaikai, that sort of overpromised and underdelivered. So there's a lot of doubt about it. Just though, on the other hand, if you look at electric cars today, there's no question that it is a perfectly good alternative. And cloud gaming today, I think, has finally now reached normal consumer comfort levels, which is funny because enterprise adopted cloud computing 30 years ago. But I think that this issue of latency has been a big deal. If you're managing hotel reservations at a big enterprise, a couple of milliseconds of latency isn't a big deal. If you're playing games, it's the difference between life and death, literally. But what I think is interesting is, having conquered that for games, we now have an all-purpose cloud computing solution for consumers that actually does a lot more than games. We felt like we had to prove ourselves in games to really gain the confidence of the world.
So I'd like to come on to that. You make an interesting point about product extension there, which I'd definitely like to come back to. But when it comes to gaming specifically, there must be a number of technological kind of barriers that you have to overcome, whether it's, because you're basically doing rendering, game processing, all of that heavy lifting is now happening, inside a data center rather than at the device. So how have you managed to build a high performance cloud that kind of addresses latency, throughput, user experience in general? What's it taken?
So there definitely have been skeptics and still are skeptics. And the most common thing we hear is you can't beat the speed of light, and that latency will always be a permanent part of the problem. I like to say we've beaten the speed of light, but we haven't done it in the traditional sense. I think most people would try to focus on shortening that distance between the user and the data center, either by having edge computing and just putting the data center closer, or optimizing that signal so it's a fewer hops on the way. We're always trying to find ways to improve that part of the equation. But where we found the real opportunity is, and what makes Shadow unique is, rather than trying to shorten that signal time, we're actually working on the natural latency that happens within any PC. And through a number of patented technologies and just sort of trade secrets, we've been able here and there in a dozen different ways to shave off a little bit of latency from all parts of that equation, so that in a sense, we've compensated for the natural latency of the signal to the data center by being faster on the part of the experience that happens inside your home. And the result is an experience that is, for most users, indistinguishable from just having a desktop PC.
So is it fair? That's interesting. Is it fair to say then that there's multiple levels of the stack that you've had to kind of work at? But the data center, the proximity to the users, distributed compute. But also, are you looking? Are you saying what you're doing is you're looking at kind of how the CPU and the GPU and storage all interoperate? Is that without giving away your secret sauce? Is that I'm sure our audience would be fascinated to hear how you're doing it in terms of high level terms.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of custom software and architecture that happens at the data center, as well, again, as a lot that happens on the user's device. And that's a big challenge for us, because a big part of what makes Shadow special is it works on so many different devices. So a lot of consumers will access our high-end gaming PC on a low-end laptop, but some of them will also want to play PC games on a Mac or even an iPhone. And we work across all of those devices by taking advantage of whatever architecture we happen to have available. And part of that is just making sure that we get the signal processed as quickly as possible. Part of it's input as well, right? So if you're playing a PC game on a mobile device like this, it's a very different set of circumstances than if you're playing it on your mouse. Oh, my mouse doesn't fit in the screen. Imagine a mouse. So, but the important thing for us is we try to offer our consumers as many varieties of options as possible. So regardless of whether you're playing on an Android device, an Apple device, a PC, or even a smart TV, we've optimized that so that for you, it feels no different than having the device in your own home.
So if you're trying to kind of manage that same level of quality of experience, and that kind of interoperability, so it doesn't matter what device you're playing on, and you mentioned TV, how have technology partnerships, firms that you've partnered with, kind of helped in making that happen?
We have a lot of partnerships. Obviously, our data center relationships are very important to us because all of the magic happens in our data center. We also have really important partnerships across Microsoft, Intel, NVIDIA come to mind, where we're both obviously big consumers of their product, but also really important technology partners, because we represent to them a whole new audience that they can reach. And that's why it's interesting for us. If you look at a company like NVIDIA, they all offer their own GeForce cloud gaming service, but it's very distinct from ours, right? Ours is a general purpose, high-powered PC as opposed to just a gaming console in the cloud. So we feel that there's a huge market that allows us to extend all of these companies' reach. We're a Paris-based company, but we actually have a pretty big office in Silicon Valley in Mountain View, specifically to be able to partner with these companies and be close to them, as well as obviously being in our biggest market, which is in the United States.
Perfect. That community of partners is kind of critical for making a service like this happen, and that constant innovation, I would assume. Is that fair to say?
It's going to be interesting to see, because I do get a lot of questions from people who will ask, how we feel about Stadia coming into the market or some of these other services. And I wish Stadia had gotten off to a better start, because I think the biggest challenge we have is people saying, well, Stadia isn't off to a great start. Are you nervous? The more companies that jump into this space, I think the better for us, because we want to legitimize this new experience. From my point of view, it's crazy that we have so many processing devices in our home that are idle for most of the day. Now, COVID's a different topic we can talk about, but when you're at home, all of your work devices are idle. When you're at work, all of your home devices are idle. And even while you're at home, most of them are. What's really valuable for us is we're able to share those resources. And that's really the efficiency that drives our economics, right? When you're not using your shadow PC, someone else can. So it unlocks a whole new set of economics, and the market potential is vast. I don't know that everybody will always be using cloud computing, but I think a vast majority of the public will benefit from that. So I'm hoping that these technology partners for ours continue to embrace it. But the fact of the matter is we're definitely the market pioneer, and proving that it works and an experience that's indistinguishable from your home device is an accomplishment I'm pretty proud of.
Well, you mentioned that Shadow is a French kind of headquartered. It's where it grew up out of Paris. Now you were pioneers, one of the early pioneers amongst a couple of other companies. Back in like 2017 and before. Yeah. We've now seen all of the big hyperscalers jumping in some way, shape, or fashion into cloud gaming, whether it's Microsoft with xCloud, Amazon's now announced, you've got Project Luna, Google Stadia, Facebook, Apple. So how do you then compete with these giants? How do you see yourself competing with these giants who obviously have invested a huge amount of capital infrastructure in data centers around the globe?
Yeah, I think the way that I see it is those other companies don't have to fail in order for us to succeed. The market is vast, so I think there's a space for everyone, particularly for us because we're based on the Windows platform. We're an open platform. So anyone can bring any content that they would use on any PC device and use it on ours. Not only gaming, but Photoshop, Unreal Engine, Autodesk, anything that you do on a PC, you can do on a Shadow. Most of the other companies jumping into this space are either very limited to just games, or they're even more limited. They're closed ecosystems. The idea being that you either subscribe to a Netflix style offering, or you have to buy all of your games only from that provider. And that really is just an extension of the old business model that we call, razors and blades, right? You buy a PlayStation, all of your games have to be PlayStation games. We don't do that. We're an open platform. Anyone can play anything that they want on it. And in that respect, we think there's always going to be a unique niche for us because we're not like a Windows PC, right? We are a Windows PC. We're a licensed Windows product.
So, and is it fair to say, I think you alluded to this in a kind of before, that it's a question of a rising tide lifts all boats? Is that how you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, right now, letting go of that powerful PC on your desktop may seem scary to some people. But once you realize that you never have to upgrade your components, you never have to worry about your hard drive going out when you need it most. You'll never have to worry about spilling water on your laptop and having to replace your device over the weekend, right? We take care of all of that for you. And it's more affordable, right? Instead of buying a $3,000 gaming PC, you're spending based on what tier of service you want, $12.99, $29.99, $49.99 to get some incredibly powerful consumer gaming devices. And again, if your device is powerful enough to run games, you can be pretty confident it can run any other application that you need.
Obviously, there's you mentioned it before, but the kind of the global elephant in the room is COVID-19. Yeah, we've kind of seen people working from home. People less out and about using mobile connectivity. Media consumption in some areas has gone up. What's been the kind of impact on you as a business, and also in terms of your business model from COVID-19? And do you see that as a structural change?
All gaming companies, I think, have done well during this environment because as people stay home and they're socially isolated, games are a great way to stay in touch with your friends and also just to spend time. The challenge for us is we are not demand constrained. We're supply constrained, right? There, you have to wait sometimes weeks to get allocated a Shadow PC just because we have more people who want it than we can deliver. So if we had unconstrained supply, we would be doing even better than we are now. What we've seen, interestingly, definitely usage has gone up among our installed base. So we definitely see people using our PC more, but they're also using it in more hours of the day. which tells me that there are definitely people playing games during their work time. So we're not going to get anyone in trouble for that, but we've definitely seen all of our usage rise, but then also again rises throughout parts of the day that you wouldn't ordinarily expect for games, right? Traditionally, our peaks are going to be in the evening after work or after school. And it still is definitely, a bigger peak during those core times. But now all throughout the day, people are definitely firing up their PC and gaming.
Well, we have to make sure that not too many CEOs are watching and now checking how much of their internet usage is from Shadow in the future. But just in terms of, kind of just taking a slightly different track for a second, there's been a lot in the press and discussion around how technologies like 5G, will transform certain sectors through, the much lower latency and the greater throughput and bandwidth that as technology will provide, and that it will transform sectors, particularly like cloud gaming or VR or AR. What's your view on how 5G is going to impact the cloud gaming space, and how do you see that kind of evolving over the next few years?
So I think that it just opens up the mobile use case for us much better than ever before. I mean, there are really three factors that organically are going to continue to help cloud computing for the consumer. There's fiber to the home. I think there's also the Wi-Fi 6, which is a much faster way to connect wirelessly inside the home, and then 5G. VR is still hard just because even latency that your eyes may not recognize can still impact your sensitivity. But for us, yes, 5G is a huge win because it allows you to take that cloud-based PC experience not just around your home but outside your home as well. I mean, you can use non-latency sensitive applications on Shadow even now without 5G, but it just opens up even more use cases outside the home. Now, that being said, I live in the United States. I got an iPhone 12 with 5G. My speeds still aren't great yet. So I think, to set expectations, it is going to take a while for the infrastructure to get built out. But once it's available in more locations and once the performance really meets its potential, it means that you can have all the power of, a full power gaming PC everywhere you go. And that's, I think, a huge opportunity. That being said, if you want to play games with a mouse and keyboard, you're still going to have to take a mouse and keyboard with you.
Yeah.
That makes me most excited about the next generation when people will start designing games specifically with cloud-based infrastructure in mind. And that's still a few years away, but that, I think, opens up a whole new world of creativity.
Yeah, I think there's been some articles about this, industry events as well, discussion about how do you actually start to develop games with a kind of mobile interface, AAA games specifically in mind, and how does that change the experience? So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over time. You did talk about kind of some of the other product extensions, or ways in which customers are using the Shadow service at the moment, because basically I think you've described it as kind of a high performance PC in the cloud.
Yeah.
So where do you see that kind of evolving in the, extending to in the future? Because you also talked about kind of utilization a little bit earlier.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to observe. Depending on how we measure it, between a third to a half of our users are already spending a significant amount of their time on Shadow outside of gaming applications. No surprise, the biggest use case is Microsoft Office. But we see people, as I mentioned earlier, using Autodesk, Photoshop, even developing games in Unity and Unreal Engine. So, and these are just people who, probably signed up initially through the gaming experience and then realized what a versatile solution it is. And for some people, it has become a full day long complete replacement for their PC. In other people's cases, it's a supplement. So while we're not pursuing that specifically as a standalone use case, we're definitely looking at opportunistic ways to expand that reach. Education is another one. Where not necessarily sort of replacing your classroom Zoom lesson, but if you're, taking a computer science course or you're using, architectural software as a student, you may not be able to afford the high-end professional PC that you'd be expected to drive that. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to reach out to educational segments as well as small business, right? If you're starting up a small design firm, buying 10 high-end design-ready PCs for your staff is a huge upfront expense. We can really take that out of the way just by allowing you to give 10 subscriptions and letting people use low-end devices. So that's something people are discovering organically, and I think over time that'll become an even more important part of our business. That's also helpful because they play off-peak, or not play, they work off-peak times. So it's great for us to be able to have non-gaming users, because in a sense, that's already idle compute capacity that's available during the daytime.
And how do you see kind of the industry kind of, I think it's fair to say it's at its early stages in its evolution. Yeah. How do you actually see that evolving, say, over the next kind of 5 years? Asking you to get out your crystal ball here a little bit. And where do you see kind of, a shadow, taking shadow in that time frame as well?
So I think there are two parts to it. I mean, one of the things that's good for us right now as early players in the space is our users don't really have to learn anything new, right? It is a Windows PC. So if you're accustomed to using Windows, then it's a natural interface for you. I suppose if you're a Mac user and you want the PC experience, there might be a few new things to learn. But it's basically, what you see is what you get. It's very simple. But it also means we're using applications that were just designed for a desktop PC. I mentioned this earlier, but as you start to get cloud native applications, you'll be able to do things that just aren't possible, right? So today our premise is anything you do on a PC, you can do on a Shadow. But moving forward, there'll be things that you can only do in the cloud. Just to stay with games, a game like Fortnite, you have 100 people playing together. If you had a cloud environment, you could have 1 million people playing together, right? You could have a permanent, persistent world. And really that is what will evolve into the metaverse over time. So the idea of, for example, having a complete World War II simulation battle where every troop in the field and every tank being driven actually is someone in real time playing that game. Those are experiences that are only possible. They're hyperscale, they're super social. And I think it'll take some time for the penetration of cloud platforms to make that possible, and then for game designers to build around it. But I think that idea of whole new experiences aren't possible. And then ultimately that metaverse experience, those are all going to have to be cloud-based experiences. And that's the evolution that I'm looking forward to for 5+ years out.
Wow, that sounds like that sounds like an ambitious, a great view of the world. They do say that gaming will be the dominant immersive entertainment in the future. It also does sound like it comes with a number of interesting technological challenges as well, though. Just wanted to kind of, if just, coming to the end of our session right now, and I just wanted to ask you, obviously our audience is kind of really interested in kind of, the experience of a company like Shadow that's challenging some of the largest, most kind of well-known companies in the world. If you were kind of talking to, one of your kind of fellow CEOs who's looking to do the same and take their offering, a European company maybe, and challenging some of the big guys, what would your kind of 3 key pieces of advice be based on your experience?
So I definitely think about the consumer first. I mean, I'm not a B2B guy by nature, so I suppose you could say put the customer first. But for us, it's really put the consumer first. We ask ourselves, every single day, if I was a consumer, what would I do? I think the second thing is that you need to be able to have partnerships that can sometimes be competition as well, right? When I was at Amazon, and at the time we provided Amazon Web Service support to Netflix, even though Amazon Prime Video was a competitor to it. So we may be using technology from people who still play in this space. And I don't think you should be afraid to do that. If you're dealing with a market that's big enough, there's room for everyone to win. And I think if I had to think of third, it would be, look, think big. One of my favorite sayings is you need a big hook to catch a big fish. And even though we're still, in startup mode, we have 100,000 satisfied subscribers across the US and Europe, now expanding into Korea as well. But our ambitions are to be the platform of choice for millions and millions of consumers, because the power of the cloud, the ability to leverage our partnerships, the be able to use data center co-location to help us speed up our expansion means that a small company has the power to pretty quickly expand to a global reach and global scale. But you have to have big ambitions to be able to do that. So we're starting small, but we're definitely thinking big.
I think that is a great way to end. Piece of advice is be customer obsessed, co-opetition for want of a better word, and think big. And I think thank you, Mike, for what has been a fascinating insight into not just shadow, but one of the kind of most interesting kind of sectors that we see in the world today. So and I'd like to thank all of our participants for listening in as well. So thank you, Mike.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.